Welcome back. It is your favorite nomadic giant, Craig, and today we wanted to try something a little bit different here. I'm here with my co host, Steven, and this is Short Shift. Today we're going to be covering the best engine sounds. Unfortunately, we don't have time nor the effort to cover diesels, rotaries, VR6s, the W family, and any inline eights. So save your comments till the end, and it'll be over soon. First off, we're going to go with the three cylinders. Steven?
All right, so best sounding three cylinders in the world. Our vote for here, and me and Craig both agree on this, is the Ford 1.0 liter EcoBoost, found in, specifically for me, the Ford Fiesta SFE, found worldwide in mini Fiestas, Focuses, and the new EcoSport CUV thing. Super tiny engine, fits on a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper as far as the top down dimension. Makes great torque, turbocharged goodness, and three-cylinder snarl. And three cylinders just sound better than four cylinders. Speaking of four cylinders, you want to take us for four cylinders, Craig?
I'll take us on the four cylinders. So the four cylinder category can get very huge and very lengthy. It is one of the most popular engines produced out in the engine theater, if you will. It falls into many different categories, all the way down to your K cars, which is sub what is 700 cc, all the way up to your big displacements we've seen as big as three cylinder, four cylinders. That being said, I'm saying the best sounding four cylinder of all time is the Honda's B16. Shout out Nads. It is an old school four cylinder that has very awesome induction noises. The intake manifold is pointed towards the driver, so you get full on induction noise effect, as well as supreme opportune uh, VTEC noises. It's an old hydraulic system that would swap over VTEC cam at a certain RPM, and you get a kick to the pants, and you'd hear an audible rev up in the range, and it is just super awesome, super reliable, sounds great. Unfortunately, it is not as great as the turbo counterparts, which the four cylinder turbo counterpart here is actually from a different generation. And we actually agreed on that it is the Fiat's Multi Air 1.4 turbo that is found in the quote quote Fiata, the Fiat 124 Spider, as well as the Fiat 500, notably in the Abarth trims. It makes Snapples and Croc or Snapples and Pops, and it makes the coal car feel a lot livelier than it has any right to feel like. I absolutely adore this engine. I really wish it was more accessible because I'd use it in other formats. Um, Stepping up to the five cylinders, Steven.
All right, so five cylinders get a little weird, right? There's not a ton of them out there. There exist enough, but we both came to the same conclusion. This engine is co-developed by Ford and Volvo, of all people. It is the Volvo B52 series, 2.5 liter five cylinder, found in many Volvo sedans and station wagons, the S60R and V70R specifically, and the Focus RS and RS 500, which many of us that grew up like me and Greg will remember the RS 500 as the screaming neon green torque steering monstrosity of goodness that Ford decided we didn't need here in the States for reasons known only to them. That said, motor sounds cool. Five cylinders always sound cool because they're inherently unbalanced and have a weird snarl, and it's good. Good little warble and rumble and turbo noises. Snap, crackle, pop, wastegates opening, all that jazz. Moving on from the turbocharged five cylinder goodness takes us to the classic inline six. What do you got for us, Greg?
And in classic inline six is what you're talking about. We're actually going to go across the pond to some German engineering, and everybody, our favorite inline six NA motor, mind you, is the BMW S54. Independent throttle body, 330 horsepower, dual rear cam, makes all the great noises, has BMW's famous reliability, quote, quote, and it's found in the E46 M3. What more do you need to say about it? It leans over, it's got a great tower of power, and it's a very good livable engine. And it has one of the very few funky features that has a rising red line based off of oil temperature. I love it. On the turbo side of the house, Steven's got this answer.
I'm kind of a JDM fanboy from the 90s, as is well known. But for everybody out there that may be expecting, it's not the Toyota Super engine. It's actually Nissan's RB26. While the Supra is a cool motor, everything else, the RB26 sounds way angrier, way better, screaming for the red line. Uh, it just has a lot sharper tone to it. Like it sounds and feels a lot more purpose built, like race car engine. Feels like race car for the street. It also it's smooth, it's warbly, turbo spoolie noises, all the turbo spoolie noises, especially with the factory twin setup, but even with big singles,
Hmm.
they spool hard and they make that wail, that 8,000 to 9,000 RPM wail that all the tuner boys just love.
Yep.
Moving away from the tuner boys and counting up in cylinders as we've passed the sixes, heading up to the America goodness V8s. What do you got for us, Greg?
And so we're going to cover V8s here, and I'd like everyone to have a tinge, a little bit of forgiveness here because this category can go way huge. Quick and dirty. The V8 that I think that is the best sounding among all the V8s in the world of all time is actually a really recent V8. It's the Ford developed 5.2 liter Voodoo motor. It's got 500 horsepower. It revs to the moon. It has a great wail and an idle. It chops hard for a dual rod cam, aluminum design V8. I absolutely love it to death. Unfortunately, my co-host does not agree with me, and he says this engine is his favorite.
While the Voodoo is cool, don't get me wrong, it sounds awesome. Granted points all. I think the much more unique LT5 from the 90s, 91 to 96 C4 ZR1 Corvettes was what's up. Uh, all aluminum, dual overhead cam, much like the Voodoo, except, 20 years earlier. Designed by Lotus and built by Mercury Marine for GM. This was what they thought was going to be the future before the LS engines debuted. Uh, 16 intake ports, 16 fuel injectors. Kind of a ridiculously complicated way to go about doing it, but it's what they had for the 90s technology, and it absolutely screamed its way up past 7,000 RPM up to almost 8, which
And
for the 90s, for a nearly 6-liter V8, was screaming, and still is.
RPM is good.
RPM is good, especially with V8s. Everybody loves to hear a big V8 singing its song. And speaking of V8s singing their song, while we're talking about V8s, we would be remiss to only be covering naturally aspirated V8s. So Craig's going to cover our forced induction V8 suggestion.
So, synonymous with a big American muscle is also the sound, and everyone loves seeing a big 871 sticking through the hood, and you got yourself a bird catcher, and life is great. As Richard Holdner would say, the only thing better than a big displacement V8 is a big displacement V8 with boost. That being said, these V8s are actually kind of mediocre in displacement, and the ones that I'm going to bring up are the Terminator and the Lightning-based Ford mod motors, though both the 4.6 supercharged and the 5.4 supercharged. They're the type of engines that have such blower whines where you can hear the guy pulling up to your neighborhood 2 blocks away as he's slowly trying to putter in, and the supercharger's just cracking off. It's very hard to replicate, and even under today's modern superchargers, they kind of mute the sound to make the car more livable. If you think about the Hellcats and the CTSVs, you don't really know that they're supercharged until you really get on it, and even then, guys have to cut holes in intakes and pipe the sound tubing into the footwells to try to get any sort of luster. These guys here, they do a pulley swap, maybe swap out a bearing here, weld something up, and then boom, you got wine for days. Now, speaking of wine for days, there's only one engine that I can think of off the top of my head that is 10 cylinders in displacement, or 10 cylinders in count, and will rev to the moon, and it whines and screeches the whole way up. Steven?
And of course, as I'm sure everyone has already guessed, there's only a handful of V10s out there. Most of them are interesting and they sound cool, but none of them compare to the Lexus LFA engine. Right? Everybody remembers when this thing came out; it was a big deal. Revs so fast they had to use a TFT screen instead of a regular analog rev counter to be able to keep track of it. Sounds like an F1 car on the street, just screaming up. That said, didn't make a ton of them. They didn't sell. I mean, they sold, but they didn't make a ton of them. So it's not like they made a huge dent in the world. But in the auditory world, they're still probably the best sounding V10 on the market. Maybe even the best sounding hypercar on the market at all. Speaking of hypercars, exotics, and other stuff, as I'm sure everybody's surmised since we're up into the crazy cylinder counts now, the next one on our list is much like Spinal Tap, going all the way past 11 to 12 cylinders. Craig's got our suggestion for the best sounding 12 cylinder on the market.
And of the 12 cylinders, there's a markedly bigger market here for what came in what. I think BMW had one they put into their 7 Series. Mercedes Benz obviously has a couple 12 cylinders that have even made their way into Pagani's. And the one that we're going to talk about, however, is the most gruffest and roughest sounding, and it's a proper multi cylinder engine that doesn't just sound like an F1 car that's detuned for the street. And that's Aston Martin's AM11 V12, found in their V12 Vantages. Couple Aston Martin's legacy with building gorgeous cars and very driver centric controls with being comfortable, and the very premise of GT is what they live for. This engine basically gives them smooth linear power. It offers a lot of power too. It's over 500, and it sounds good and it fits the part, and it kind of sells the car beyond just the looks of the car too. It's very desirable, and I love it to bits. Any last thoughts, Steven?
No, no, to take us all the way from 3 cylinders up past 11, all the way up to 12 cylinders. Uh, for the stuff that we skipped, like we just didn't have time for it. I'm sorry, Volvo's VR6s, all you guys. Still love you, still cool engines, just didn't fit in the format today.
And all right, so signing off here, my name is Craig. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at nomadic.wheelman, and my friend Steven here.
That's right, and I'm at Just Can't Drive 55, and we'll see you guys next time.